live on Sky News Australia. The Rita Panahi Show.
You're watching the Rita Panahi Show. Coming up tonight, students skip school to attend climate change protests across the country. Anthony Albanese refuses to join US President Joe Biden in calling Chinese President Xi Jinping a dictator. We'll have more on Labor's embarrassing capitulation to Peter Dutton. Douglas Murray will cover the suicidal stupidity of the modern left, who are sinking to new lows with a newfound adoration of Osama bin Laden. I wish I was joking. And we'll have a big edition of Lefties losing it for you tonight, including Green Senator Nick McKim's latest outburst.
Extremist fascists who are transphobes. We are not going to facilitate providing parliamentary privilege to that kind of people. If the hat fits, Senator O'Sullivan can put it on if he wants to.
Senator McKim, resume your seat.
I withdraw that comment.
But first, today we saw primary and secondary school students skip the classroom for city streets across the country to protest impending climate doom that can only be avoided if we impoverish ourselves some more. These poor, indoctrinated kids genuinely believe that catastrophic climate change poses a serious risk to their future.
It's really important for us to be here because, you know, as students, it's our future that's on the line with the climate crisis. And the Labor government is just throwing us under the bus.
I'm here, like Lorelei said, to protest so we can stop climate change and make sure everyone has a better future.
Did you have to check with Mum and Dad, or...?
My mum asked me to come, so I was just like, yes.
And of course, these protests will not be occurring without activist teachers and activist parents.
Well, I think it's probably one of the most important issues of our time, you know, and this is, you know, my daughter is 11. I mean, you know, if we're not going to make our climate targets by 2030, what is it going to be like when it's 2050? And I just think this is urgent, and to get kids kind of developing their sense of social and climate justice, you know, at a young age is just a great thing to do.
I'll be speaking to Colleen Harkin later in the program about the hold the climate cult has on Australian school children. But first, let's have a little fun at the expense of former Victorian Premier Dan Andrews, who is finding out that he's not Teflon Dan in retirement. The poor guy can't even rub shoulders with the rich folk of the Mornington Peninsula on the region's world-class golf courses. Well, why, you might ask? Well, he's not wanted.
Are you still feeling the effects of the COVID lockdowns?
I think everyone is, to be honest. It was just a shambles, the whole thing. So, yeah, no, I wouldn't play golf with him, no.
So you wouldn't want to play golf with him?
I wouldn't want to play golf with him, no.
It was the only place in the world, really, wasn't it? We weren't allowed to play golf. Everywhere else in the world you're allowed to play golf. They were right. The Mornington Peninsula were locked indoors. So, yeah, a lot of people still harbour feelings that that was the wrong thing. They don't want a situation at golf clubs where if you put your name down on the timesheet that nobody wants to play with you. That's the real issue, and that's the sort of thing that rips golf clubs apart.
I can give the President a message tonight. Most of the members of his golf club would not want Dan Andrews as a member. If Dan Andrews is allowed to join the Portsea Golf Club, I'll quit, I'll resign, I'll tear up my membership, and I'll go and play golf somewhere else.
Now, let me give you a little more history here. Dan Andrews, like many socialists before him, loves nothing more than to rub shoulders with the super wealthy, and he has more than one billionaire mate on the peninsula advocating for him, but even that may not be enough to get him across the line. You know, Australians are typically pretty laid back, live and let live types, but Dan Andrews is uniquely despised by many Victorians. It's a state he ruled with an iron fist for close to a decade, a state where he imposed 6 crippling lockdowns, and a state where he has left record debt, the biggest of any state by some margin. So It should come as no surprise that he's being effectively blackballed from the peninsula's premier golf courses, despite advocacy from his billionaire mates, including property mogul Max Beck. As reported in the Herald Sun this week, the prospect of Andrews becoming a member of Portsea Golf Club had some members seeing red. The reaction saw property tycoon Max Beck lash out at the members of Portsea Golf Club for being small-minded. He said, "It's just all about a bloke who wants to play golf and enjoy the rest of his life. It's ridiculous. He's worked his guts out for the state with his beliefs." I'm very disappointed, but we'll just see whether the committee takes into account his political beliefs or his personality and his golfing ability. They are the two things they should be assessing him on. And later in the week, the Portsea Golf Club president, Phil Kramer, stepped in to remind members that the Portsea Golf Club prides itself on inclusivity and diversity of membership, and in fact has a reputation of being a very welcoming club for all to enjoy playing golf and fellowship. The problem is, Phil, many of your members do not want to enjoy fellowship with Dan Andrews. And it's not just at Portsea Golf Club that Dan is persona non grata. As former golf pro Mark Allen explained this week, he's going to be met with resistance wherever he goes.
They have not forgiven him, and I can tell you this, on Friday night at the Sorrento Hotel, it was the talk of the region, and to the point where not only members from Portsea but members from other clubs were saying that if he's trying to join anywhere down here, they just will not let him join.
You reckon the whole peninsula will blackball him?
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, just on the Portsea Golf Club president, his statement shows he misunderstood the news reports. As Mick Warner wrote in the Herald Sun, Mr Kramer wrongly asserted that the Herald Sun had suggested that a formal application had been received by the club and Mr Andrews rejected from membership. The Herald Sun, in fact, reported that golfers had been made aware of Mr Beck's proposal for him to be considered for membership, which has occurred, and that there had been strong opposition from many of those members, which also occurred. Mr Andrews is deeply unpopular among some of the Portsea Golf Club members, particularly due to his bans on Victoria's golfing community during the pandemic and his decision to include the Mornington Peninsula in metropolitan restrictions, which were often much tougher than those imposed on regional Victoria. Yes, it may be a small thing, it may even be a little petty, but Dan's golfing predicament is a tiny dose of instant karma, and it's delicious. Joining me now to discuss this week's top stories is the Menzies Research Centre's Nick Cater. Nick, let's start with federal politics. Yesterday in the upper house we saw some things we shouldn't have seen, but in the lower house is where Peter Dutton had a big win. The Labor government accepted all 6 of his amendments. That was great to see because these amendments are all sensible. But in the upper house, we did see, shamefully, Liberal Senator Alex Antique's efforts to have a bill on the medical transitioning of children. That bill was blocked from being referred to a Senate hearing by Labor and the Greens and a number of small L bedwetting Liberals. I'm really shocked, Nick, that you've got Liberals who are voting against a request to refer this matter to a Senate hearing so both sides can argue their case.
It's mystifying, isn't it, Rita? On the same day, of course, that Labor, under a lot of pressure and with considerable guidance from Peter Dutton, managed to pull the right rein for once on immigration. I think both sides of Parliament should know that when the Greens are squealing, when the Greens are screeching and carrying on, you're in the right spot. You're in your right spot. And I just think this is... Look, I just don't get it. I'm not going to try and explain why Liberals as well as Labor members didn't support Alex Antique with this eminently sensible common sense bill. But, transgender derangement syndrome runs deep, I think.
Well, on Labor's backflip, though, for this emergency legislation in response to last week's High Court decision, a decision that is now seeing, Nick, rapists and murderers released from detention. These amendments were good to see, but it did upset the left. The Guardian is saying it's a travesty. They've accused the government of caving to Dutton and creating a draconian bill. And the Greens leader, Adam Bandt, was also triggered. He tweeted, "Labor is dancing to the Liberals' tune, rushing anti-refugee legislation through Parliament today. When I tried to speak, Labor gagged me." After just a few seconds, Labor is letting Peter Dutton write anti-refugee legislation and silencing anyone who tries to stop them. Well, this is good news, Nick. If Adam Bandt is being silenced, I think I'm on board.
It is, and thanks to the leadership of Prime Minister Peter Dutton. Oh, sorry, I made the mistake. But it did look like the Prime Minister. He was the one that leading this debate yesterday. But, you're absolutely right. But Labor's problem is that they kind of know in their heads that the place they need to be is the place where the Greens start screeching. But they can't stand that sort of rasping noise. It sort of pulls them over. This is the real challenge for Anthony Albanese if he ever comes back to Australia, to recognise that the only way of rescuing this government's prospects is to get with Middle Australia. You know, he went on this adventure into identity politics, which has just divided the nation and just come up with an empty, and nothing with the voice. He should learn his lesson from that. He needs to get back in the centre. On immigration in particular, this man was a minister during the Rudd-Gillard years. He should know how important this stuff is, but he just does not seem to have learned.
You say he should get back in the centre, but we forget Anthony Albanese is from Labor's socialist left faction. That's where he has been his entire adult life. His political career has been at that end of the political spectrum. Yes, he did pretend to be a moderate before the election, and he certainly fooled a few people, but I think his natural ideology leans that way. So this must feel very odd for him to try to move towards the centre. Now, talking about socialists, the Mulgrave by-election will take place tomorrow to find a replacement for former Premier Dan Andrews. It's looking like a tight contest between Labor, the Liberals, and a prominent independent candidate in Cook. To be honest with you, Nick, I don't know how tight it's going to be. There's every chance that the Libs may come in third in this seat, Nick.
Which is not a good result for the Libs, because this is the sort of seat they do need to win. If you look at the profile of Mulgrave, if that seat was in Western Sydney, it would be a coalition seat, a Liberal seat by now. Because, just as the Liberals have lost ground in those inner city, tealy-greeny sort of seats, Labor should be losing ground in seats like Mulgrave. So the Liberal Party's got to really focus on this, and if they don't score a good result tomorrow, then I think they've really got to think hard about their future.
And they've got to think hard about their current leadership. Now to Sydney, and a Labor councillor from Bondi's Waverley Council has stepped down from the board of a Jewish preschool after her Hamas-supporting X account was revealed, X formerly Twitter. Michelle Gray retweeted comments including, "The criminals here are not Hamas, it is the West," and the US Republicans were easily more radical than Hamas. Oh my goodness. The Bondi Award she serves is one that's heavily populated with Jewish constituents, and she herself converted in 2021, Nick. But the parents of this Jewish preschool have found this secret Twitter X account, and understandably they're not happy.
Yeah, look, this just shows, how desperate we are to have some moral clarity on this issue, and even a member of the Jewish community is so confused about Hamas. The Republicans more extreme than Hamas. As far as I can see, the Republicans haven't been butchering and slaughtering babies, whatever else they may be guilty of. Why people can come up with a statement like that in the cold light of day and publish it is just beats me. And she was watching. This is the thing that I really don't get, Rita. She was watching the ABC's Q&A. Now that really is strange behaviour for anybody with their head screwed on.
Wow. Well, yeah, not strange behaviour for people who are retweeting that sort of content. Yeah, it's not the Republican voters who are marching in the street and trying to minimise what Hamas did. That ain't the Republican voter base at all. Now, let's go to APEC in San Francisco, where US President Joe Biden has pledged to accelerate the efforts to address catastrophic climate change. Look forward to higher bills there, folks. And the president caused visible stress to his Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, when he again called Xi a dictator. Have a look at this.
Mr. President, after today, would you still refer to President Xi as a dictator? This is a term that you used earlier this year.
Well, look, he is. I mean, he's a dictator in the sense that he is the guy who runs a country that is a communist country that is based on a form of government totally different than ours.
That is just hilarious, Nick. But Blinken may be wincing there, but it's true. The dude is a dictator. How else can you put it?
Yeah. A rare moment of clarity from President Biden, I thought, and he's absolutely right. I mean, I don't know how you would define him as anything other than that. What is he, some sort of elected democratic leader or something? Of course he's not. He's a dictator. He has complete control, I think, not only of the country, but the Communist Party.
I think Biden's puppet masters probably told him not to say that. They probably had a very nice line for him to sidestep that question they knew was coming, and he went off script, it looks like, judging by that reaction. Just before we go, the New York Times is saying that the Biden administration's illegal immigration crisis is having a real impact in New York and all across the country. Today, Mayor Eric Adams has announced the impact of the migrant crisis will see deep budget cuts impacting just about every sector, Nick. The number of police department officers is going to be slashed to below 30,000. That's for the first time since the 80s. And the education department in New York is going to be slashed by $1 billion over 2 years, along with a number of other cuts. So, Nick, we've run out of time, but it just means if you're a sanctuary city, it comes at a cost. Thank you so much for your time again tonight, Nick Cater. As we do every week, it's time to speak to the author of international bestsellers, including The War on the West, The Strange Death of Europe, and The Madness of Crowds. Douglas Murray, let's start with the suicidal self-loathing and stupidity that we see among the modern left, and they've reached a new low yet again. Have a look at this TikTok trend featuring thousands of what seem to be educated Americans talking about reading Osama bin Laden's letter to America, where he explains why he attacked the US. These TikTokers say this letter opened their eyes and made them reevaluate how they see the world.
Osama bin Laden's letter to America explaining why he attacked Americans. This has left me very disillusioned, and I feel the same exact way I felt when I was deconstructing Christianity.
I will never look at life the same. I will never look at this country the same. I will never... Please read it, and if you have read it, let me know if you are also going through an existential crisis in this very moment, because in the last 20 minutes, my entire viewpoint on the entire life I have believed and I have lived has changed.
In reading the letter, I could only think of this tweet that I saw the other day. Under settler colonialism, any kind of resistance is branded as terrorist because the only acceptable violence is violence by the occupier.
Douglas, we're in deep trouble, aren't we?
I think we are. The parents of these kids or young people have completely failed. They've completely failed to educate their children in any way whatsoever. Their children have become these empty-headed, empty vessels into which any ignorance, it seems, can pour. I'm amazed by this, and there aren't many things I feel like I can still be amazed by, Rita. But I'm amazed by this, not least because Osama bin Laden's letter to America, his pre-9/11 rantings, you would have thought might have been slightly cast into a negative light by 9/11, for instance, and treated at least with the sort of amount of skepticism that you might apply to, say, a school shooter's manifesto. Not that any school shooter, appalling as they are, has ever come close to what Osama bin Laden managed to do in his benighted career. But secondly, the thing that's amazing about it is, of course, is that these kids seem to be kids, actually some of them adults, seem to be have their whole lives sort of turned upside down by something which I suspect most of which they had absolutely no understanding of. One of Osama bin Laden's chief criticisms of America before 9/11 was its involvement in East Timor. I would love to see if any of these young people in question know even what I'm talking about when I say the words East Timor. I once did a discussion about Osama bin Laden on the BBC with a left-wing editor, and I said East Timor in regards to Osama bin Laden, and in the break, I saw her Googling East Timor on her phone. And the staggering idiocy of these people is just legion. But yes, there's always another circle to the inferno, isn't there?
Now, you've been in Gaza. Indeed, you went through the same part of the fence that the Hamas terrorists broke through on that morning on October 7. Tell me what you saw in Gaza, the scale of the suffering there, and what you think is going to come next.
Yes, you're right. This week I managed to go to Gaza through the route, as you mentioned, that Hamas terrorists poured on October the 7th. On the way in, we saw a very small number of journalists were allowed in. We were shown, among other things, a new tunnel, one of the Hamas terror tunnels that the IDF had discovered. They blew it up in front of us as part of this huge underground network. Of course, we've said before, but it bears repeating that Hamas, could have made Gaza into the Singapore on the sea, and they made it into this sort of hole where they just dug down and dug their terror tunnel network. So we saw that and saw the IDF trying to destroy part of that. And further in with the first journalists to view the humanitarian corridor that the Israelis had opened up. We were just up from the Al-Shifa hospital, which the world's been concentrated on this week. And just up the road from the Shifa hospital, we're able to see the movement of Gazans from north to south under the directions of the IDF. We're trying to encourage them to get out of the area of operations which the IDF and Hamas are operating in, which is very much sort of door-to-door fighting, a lot of airstrikes, a lot of tank and anti-tank artillery, a lot of machine gun back and forth. Yes, I mean the Gaza Strip is pretty ruined as far as I could see. But when we rolled out at sundown, it was very obvious, another reminder of why they're there. You come out past the Gaza fence at the kibbutz of Be'eri, which was pretty much completely decimated on October the 7th. Be'eri was a small, mainly left-wing kibbutz, like so many of the others around there, filled with people who had peaceful, peace now intentions, wanted to live in peace with their neighbours in Gaza, and were raped, slaughtered, and burned in their houses on October the 7th. It's a reminder on the way out of why the Israelis have gone in.
Now, you spoke about those humanitarian corridors and you wrote about Hamas trying to stop Gazans from leaving the north of the Gaza Strip. It wants human shields. Tell me about these reports of Hamas actually gunning down their own people, gunning down civilians who are trying to flee.
Yes, not far from where I was, that happened. The Gazan, the Hamas in the Gaza were initially, by the way, when the IDF told Gazans to move south. Of course, Hamas tried to keep them in their houses. tried to persuade Gazans to stay. And whereas the IDF were dropping leaflets and text messaging the people of Gaza to tell them to move south, Hamas used the more Hamas-like approach of just massacring people as they moved. Of course, in their international wisdom, the international press, to a great extent, said that this was the Israelis who had gunned down the civilians. The Israelis have no need to or wish to gun down civilians going from north to south. They wish only to capture, first of all, Hamas leaders, and secondly, to try to find some of the 240 Israeli civilians, completely innocent civilians who were torn from their houses and families on October 7th and are currently believed to be in Gaza as hostages. So that's the only reason the Israelis have to be searching people as they go south. Hamas used its own normal tactics, and once again it showed its great love of the Palestinian people by shooting them as they fled. All of this is a reminder that the international community, which forever calls for Israel to have a ceasefire, seems to be completely silent on the question of Hamas and Hamas's ceasefire, not least a ceasefire against the citizens of Gaza.
Now to the UK, and we saw the sacking of Home Secretary Suella Braverman, and then a scathing response from her detailing Rishi Sunak's many failures. She wrote about the PM adopting wishful thinking to avoid having to make hard choices. Douglas, what is the current state of the Tories, and will we see a challenge to Sunak's leadership before the election?
The Conservative Party can always amaze you by being in a greater mess on closer inspection than you even think when you first look. The Tory party in particular, when they come close to catastrophic electoral defeats, tends towards this sort of infighting. I actually thought Braverman's letter was pretty surprising by its savagery against the Prime Minister. There were 2 points that stood out to me in the 3-page letter. The first was the Home Secretary saying, reminding the Prime Minister that he has no mandate from the actual party in the country. He was rejected by Conservative voters when he stood in favour of Liz Truss. But whatever you think of Liz Truss, nevertheless, the party faithful voted for her. They did not vote for Rishi Sunak, who was imposed upon them. The second thing, a much more devastating thing to my mind, is the fact that Suella Braverman says in her letter toward the end that Rishi Sunak simply allowed the hate marches, the anti-Semitic hate marches and open racism of the Hamasniks and their friends in London and other cities across the UK in recent weeks. It's a damning claim to make about a sitting Prime Minister, and one that I think will have huge repercussions, actually. The whole letter makes Rishi Sunak look exceptionally weak, as indeed he has been, in failing to direct the police to, for instance, arrest the supporters of Hamas where they are in the streets, and instead, as we've seen in many videos, take an incredibly tough line on anyone who has the temerity to, for instance, fly the Union flag.
Douglas, is there any chance that Suella or someone else will challenge before the election? Because at this stage, it looks like Rishi is headed for certain defeat.
It's quite likely. I mean, I think that you can smell the beginnings of a Tory leadership challenge in this. But then arguably you always can. The Conservative Party changes leader at the moment about once a year or so. And it's an extremely bad sign for the country and for the party. The awful thing about British politics in a phase like this is that people squabble in the party for prominence, preeminence, and of course have that great thing which they all think they could at some point get, which is the top job. And all the time waiting in the wings is a Labour Party, a Labour opposition, which on every single issue is much, much worse than them, to my mind at least, but which they seamlessly help into office with every bit of infighting they indulge in.
Douglas Murray, thank you so much for your time this evening.
It's a great pleasure. Thank you.
And still to come, Lefties losing it and Senator Alex Antic on the fiery Albanese Dutton clashes this week. And Israeli TV mocks the BBC again.
All we are saying is give ceasefire a chance.
The fire must be seized.
I'll see you in a couple of minutes. Welcome back. Now, I mentioned at the top of the show that Labor and the Greens, together with a handful of smaller Liberals, have shot down a request by Senator Alex Antic to refer his bill to a Senate hearing. This is the Childhood Gender Transition Prohibition Bill, seeking to ban gender reassignment treatment and surgery for children. That inspired this rather emotional rant from the Greens' Nick McKim.
Bunch of right-wing transphobes. That is exactly what Senator Antic and I'm sure Senator Roberts, extremist fascists who are transphobes. We are not going to facilitate providing parliamentary privilege to that kind of people. If the hat fits, Senator O'Sullivan can put it on if he wants to.
Senator McKim, resume your seat.
I withdraw that comment.
Liberal Senator Alex Antic joins me now. Now, what you were seeking to do here, Senator, was to refer your bill to a Senate hearing where both sides could make their case. Why is that inspiring so much opposition?
Well, that's a great question, Rita, and I don't know the answer to that, except to say that all we were asking for, really, all I was asking for here was for this bill to be referred off to a hearing. Really, it's just getting evidence before the Senate. So that would include getting those that are for this treatment and those that are against this treatment in. But somehow that elicited a fairly animated response. And I do wonder, I mean, I think what we're seeing here is, this sort of almost closed book approach to this. There is only one answer, and it must be to have surgery and puberty blocking drugs for kids when they exhibit these symptoms. And there are many people in our community that share a very different view. One of the great ways to get a bill right, because ultimately I hope this bill will hit the parliament floor, but one of the best ways this system gets it right and irons out the kinks is by hearing evidence from both sides. So it really was no more or less than that. Unfortunately, though, Labor and the Greens conspired to shut it down. They don't even want a hearing. They don't want people coming in and telling their stories, which I think is absolutely lamentable.
Now, the Greens and Labor, they were predictable in blocking this request, but there were also a small number of Liberals who did not back you, who voted with the Greens or abstained, including Simon Birmingham, we had Dean Smith, Jane Hume, quite a few others. How can the coalition still have MPs who do not want to see this issue even reviewed? We've seen it reviewed in the UK, in Scandinavia and elsewhere, and it's very much a necessary measure to ensure that children aren't being harmed.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, that's right. This was simply a referral, I mean, to a committee for hearing. I don't know why that would be so controversial. I don't think it's controversial at all. It's probably a question best put to Simon Birmingham. Simon is the leader of the Senate here and I think makes the decision as to whether or not these are taken as conscience motions. I don't think they should be conscience motions. I think they're open and shut, and I think this should have been referred off, and I think we should have had every member of the coalition supporting them, frankly. But that's a matter. These are the great things about this party, is it does allow conscience votes and it does allow people to vote with their conscience or to abstain from voting. So that's a matter for them.
Senator Antic, the conscience vote is supposed to be a rare thing. It shouldn't be every other week, which it appears to be the case these days. It should be maybe once in your parliamentary career there's a conscience vote. But now it seems to be a routine matter, and I think it only weakens the coalition and confuses the electorate to what you actually stand for. But moving on to other matters, the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition, Peter Dutton, got into a heated argument in Parliament this week over the state of anti-Semitism in this country. Let's have a look.
This Prime Minister needs to stand up and to be united with the Jewish community, and he's not.
I make no apologies for standing up against anti-Semitism, and I will do it unequivocally. But I also have a track record of standing up for the rights and for justice of Palestinian people. And I make no apologies for being a consistent supporter of a two-state solution.
We saw the Sydney Morning Herald's David Crowe slamming Peter Dutton's speech as a cheap ploy for political gain and an ugly fight we don't need in these anxious times. What's your reaction to some of the commentary from the political pundits and also the Prime Minister's performance in this area?
Well, I mean, I try not to listen to too many of the political pundits because most of them, don't really get it right. And I think that's the case here. I have to say that in this case, what do people want? We've been saying, those of us that know Peter well, that this guy is a man of integrity and he is someone that will lay a punch when the need comes. And we've seen that this week. I mean, if ever there was a call for the adults in the room to rise up when the degraders are in charge of the ship, this was it. And Peter took the reins this week and landed more blows in about 25 minutes with this bill and the corrections being made to it than this government's laid in its entire term. It's been a very, very bad month for this government, dating back to The Voice, but then throwing in the confusion about what the message is about the Gaza conflict. And then on top of that, this immigration debacle this week. I think what we have to see here is the Australian people are starting to get a taste for what they voted for, and there are a lot of people driving around with don't blame me, I voted Liberal stickers on their cars at the moment. I can tell you they're going to get more popular as the days go on.
Now, we did see Labor do a major backflip yesterday. They completely capitulated to Peter Dutton and the Coalition's amendments to the emergency legislation in response to the High Court decision that's seen criminals, rapists, murderers released into the community. What do you make of that legislation? Is that enough? And what can we do long term to ensure that we can secure our borders and also ensure people who are not fit to be in the community are in detention?
Yeah, well, I mean, it seems in one way or another, every time Labor get the keys to the building here, we see an immigration crisis, whether or not it's allowing porous borders through the boats, as we saw back in the sort of the 2007 era, or with this now. It's just in Labor's DNA to get this all wrong. This bill, we have to understand, was something that really was signalled months and months ago. There was every chance that we were going to get to this point, depending on what the High Court said. The opportunity was there to come up with a better fix than we got much, much earlier, and that opportunity wasn't taken. So it was taken to Peter Dutton and his team to actually save the furniture on this. As to what could be done, well, that's a longer stretch question. There are potentially powers using the various terrorism powers that might be used, and there is the possibility of broader, far-reaching reforms that are made. But part of the problem here was that this bill was slammed on the desk of this side of the fence at 7:15 a.m. and Peter and his team were given about 25 minutes to an hour in order to work out what the position was. So this sort of holding the fort position that's been put through, which, by the way, had to be patched up by us, is the best we're going to do in the short term. And look, I think it needs a greater scrutiny. We cannot have a situation where violent criminals, rapists, sex offenders and others are being released into the community. This is just a fundamental basic no.
Absolutely. Senator Alex Antic, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thanks, Rita.
Now it's time for Lefties Losing It. Let's start Lefties Losing It with pop star Pink, who took to X to tweet this falsehood this week. She said the following are some titles of books that have been banned from schools in Florida. What have got on the list there? To Kill a Mockingbird, The Hate You Give, Forrest Gump, A Catcher in the Rye, Girls Who Code, Atlas Shrugged, 1984, the list goes on and on. Well, it was, of course, a lie. There was a lie that was circulated widely thanks to that tweet from Pink, because after all, she has 30 million followers on the platform. But that didn't stop Community Notes from fact-checking her. Have a look at this Community Note that was added to her tweet saying that this list has been proven incorrect. These books are not banned in Florida. In fact, some are on Florida's required reading list. Fantastic. But guess what happened? Instead of apologising, instead of just, deleting the false tweet, she doubled down with this little tantrum about the MAGA cult getting all mad. Well, please, Pink, that looks a lot like projection on your part. Maybe calm down the anger and try some facts. And those books you had on that list were not accurate. Now let's go to the UK and watch this old lefty losing it on the Piers Morgan show.
Are they a terror group?
Look, Piers,
can you say it?
Piers, can we have a discussion?
Can you say it?
Can we have a discussion?
Can you call them a terror
Piers,
group? Jeremy?
Can we have a discussion?
Can you call them a terror
Piers,
group?
Is it possible to have a rational discussion?
Are you
with
prepared to call Hamas a terror group?
Is it possible to have a rational discussion with you? Is it possible? Come on, answer that question.
You can't, can you?
You answer it.
No, it's my show. You answer my question.
Well,
are Hamas a terror group?
Listen, can I...
Are they a terror group?
Piers, can I speak?
Answer the question.
Can I speak?
Are they a terror group?
That was former Labor leader Jeremy Corbyn, who could not bring himself to call Hamas a terror group, and he also refused to say whether he would keep them in power. Goodness me. Now, don't go anywhere. Coming up after the break, we're going to look at these climate protests across the country with kids skipping school to protest against, I don't know, oil, gas, progress. Welcome back. Now, students were able to get a climate doctor's note ahead of today's school strike for climate. The doctor's note signed by Professor David Carrolley from the University of Melbourne and Dr. Nick Abel from ANU says this student is unfit for school due to a major climate health concern, and they're suffering from elevated stress and feelings of despair due to the impacts of climate change. It ends with, "It is my recommendation that they take a sick day to protest for a sick planet." And thousands of students did skip school today to protest for the climate. A similar pro-Palestinian school strike is planned for next week. While some politicians push back on this madness, the Victorian Premier seems to be on board, and so does the Victorian's Greens leader, Samantha Ratnam, who said it makes perfect sense for these same students to protest next week for Palestine after today's climate protest.
They're seeing young people just like them suffering through a horrific war that's unfolding before their eyes. They're asking their leaders to act to call for a ceasefire, and today they're asking their leaders to act to protect their climate and their planet for their future and generations beyond them.
Joining me now is the IPA's National Manager of their Class Action Program, Colleen Harkin. Colleen, what do you think of this mock sick note that kids were given today to take a day off school and go protest?
Well, the relationship between a student and whether they go to school or not is ultimately between that student, the parents and the school. But schools shouldn't be engaging in political activism. Unfortunately, this is the bread and butter of the national curriculum. It teaches kids persistently that they are global citizens and they're worldly warriors with a permanent obligation to protest. So it's not a surprise to see this happening, but it's inappropriate.
Well, absolutely. We're going to see many of these same students missing another day of school next week because they're going to be marching for Palestine. I mean, is this focus on far-left activism impacting on their academic results?
Definitely. Look, the most recent National Assessment of Civics and Citizenship shows us that only 38% of our Year 10s actually understand our own system of government. And they're really proficient, all of them, at describing ways of protesting. But what they're not good at is our academic numeracy and literacy. So the most recent NAPLAN results show us that 1 in every 3 students is failing. So it certainly has consequences for their ability to become independent people in their own life. The skill set's just not there.
And they call everything justice. It's climate justice and social justice. It's just far-left activism, and it's not very clever, kids. But how are we measuring now internationally Australia's results in both literacy and numeracy?
Yeah. The average 15-year-old Australian is now more than a year behind where they were 20 years ago.
Wow.
That's across numeracy and literacy and science. So there's independent evidence to show that we are going back at the rate of knots. It's not only just our academic standards. The PISA results show that our kids are 70th out of 77 for climate discipline environment in the classroom. So the activist agenda of the national curriculum has real consequences for teachers in the classroom and what they're having to deal with. And then we have a whole lot of teachers who are exiting the profession.
Oh, we certainly have a teachers' crisis. What those PISA results, what does that mean if we're coming in 70th
out of 77? That's for the climate, the discipline climate in the classroom. Level of noise, level of compliance, the amount of time that's wasted, that's where students can't actually settle down to study because of the lack of discipline in the classrooms.
And that is something parents complain about consistently, that lack of discipline. And it just doesn't seem to be fashionable these days in modern education to have discipline in the classroom.
It's a real issue because the bow also is broken in the initial teacher training where the teachers are not taught. It's not part of their basic training as to how do you manage a classroom. What they get in their initial teacher training is activism as well, ideological push, and they're not learning the teachers are not learning themselves the core skills that they need before they even get into the classroom.
Well, the curriculum is just littered with activism. So whether the teacher's political or not, it almost doesn't matter because it's in the curriculum, it's embedded in there. And then if you do have an activist teacher on top of that, then I can understand why we are trailing in all these measurements internationally. What's your advice to parents who are grappling with this? They're seeing their kids come home, they're being radicalised. Some of them are actually needing counselling because they're suffering from climate anxiety. It's something we've talked to child psychologists about in this program. What do you tell those parents?
Look, teachers should never be engaged in political activism in the classroom, but we saw it during the referendum. So many classrooms and the Education Union promoting the Yes campaign, and little children as young as 5 and 6 going home with colour-in things that sort of said, you know, sorry starts with me and I say yes. So it's there. And I would say to parents, never forget your agency. You are the parent. And so to keep that close relationship with your own child, and don't give away your rights to parenting your own child.
But so many parents are shy about that. They don't want to impose their values on their children, but they're quite happy for teachers to impose their values, or pop stars, or sporting stars. It is a strange phenomenon at the moment where parents are almost being led by their kids, even in some of these political debates.
Yeah, completely. So we've sort of lost, the parents' rights have been lost, and we've, as you say, we've sort of allowed that to happen over a period of time. Starts out with something really simple, like the school will teach my child to swim, and then all of a sudden they're coming out the other end with political views and lack of detailed knowledge about some of these things. I mean, for example, with the climate scenario, I mean, students get only renewable energy pushed as
That's it. They don't even talk about.
They don't know anything else. They don't know anything about energy security, you know, kit and caboodle that goes with it. So, but I would say to parents, always remember that you are the parent. The school is not the parent of the child.
Good advice there, Colleen Harkin. Thank you so much for your time this evening. Don't go anywhere. Still to come, the BBC is mocked by a satirical Israeli TV show for their coverage of the Hamas war. I'll show you more after this break. Welcome back. Now, Israeli comics have again taken aim at the BBC, mocking the public broadcaster's anti-Israeli coverage. Here you'll see a BBC reporter speaking to the head of Hamas.
OK, look, it's really hard to conduct an interview with this noisy kidnapped baby. Is he always like that?
Oh, at night it's even worse, Rachel. Every time we fire a rocket, he wakes up.
Oh, no.
I didn't have one good night sleep in a month.
Wait, are you telling me that there is an Israeli baby that's torturing you by sleep deprivation?
What? Yes!
Occupying your house?
Yes!
So unfair, so unfair. And the world does absolutely nothing about it. I really hope you'll get a ceasefire soon. Thank you so much, Mr. Sinwar.
No. Thank you, Rachel.
It's dark, but it's funny. That's it from me. Up next is the US Report with James Murrow. I'll see you Sunday morning for Outsiders. Good night.